I've certainly been enjoying all of these webinars we've been doing in this series as much as all of you have, I think. And I'm looking forward to today's because it's that kind of age-old issue we always had about email and what do we do with it. So I look forward to talking with Troy more about that after the presentation. But Troy, take it away.
Thank you. Let's see. I think I might be able to get my camera to come up here. Either way, what we're going to do here today, like Rick had mentioned, we're going to kind of continue on what we've been doing for the past 3 weeks. But today we'll kind of look more specifically at email. Now, in the past 3 webinar series, we did quite a bit around kind of setting up the system, specifying kind of what kind of metadata we wanted on it, what kind of objects we were looking at. We had some spreadsheets with physical information. We had SharePoint sites with folder information. We had shared drives and SharePoint sites with electronic documents on them. And what we've kind of done up till now is started to build a kind of relationship, hierarchical view of an organization with all of that information coming together. Now, the purpose and the more main focus of today will be around how we get some of this metadata, how we can create some rules to be able to populate things like employee IDs or project numbers or flag things, and build on kind of the next level of information or metadata and information associated with our records and information as a corporation. So quick recap, kind of where we were. We started out building the objects. We looked at some physical information. I'll go to my all objects here. We brought in a number of boxes from the spreadsheet, and we kind of related that to a department that was within Western IM. We found those departments in a database, actually, not in a spreadsheet. It was actually coming from a SQL database that might have been the back end for another application, for example. And under those kinds of departments, we started putting that physical information alongside the electronic information that we kind of came from an area on a shared drive. What we saw last week with the data engine and some of the generic things that can happen without creating anything specific is we related those to those departments. So if we found something that had accounts payable, we related it to our accounts payable. So we get this view of our company, the department, and the information that was within it. Today, I definitely go back and watch the last one if you didn't see it. Today, I'll kind of go to the next level and focus on the data that's on these objects, particularly with email. So let's look at a section of my email here. I'll just bring up a full, here, let me bring this over to the screen here and make it a little bit smaller. We're actually gonna just look at a subsection of my email here. So I've got a folder in my email that I've got a bunch of emails here that we're gonna kind of deal with today. Now, the way that the profiles work within Whisper is when we build our profile, we can specify which area of our email we look at. And in this case, we're looking at a folder. You can do this for anywhere, you know, your inbox, your sent box. You know, somebody leaves the organization. We'll probably talk about this a little bit later, some of the process we can do about what do we do with all that email that's left over. But I'm going to focus on this subsection, this one particular folder on my drive when I go through the rules that we have here. I'm going to close my Outlook connector here. So when we were dealing with the shared drive information and the physical information, we wanted to find things like, okay, what department was that in? Now we're going to go down a little bit further and on things like a document or an email, there's particular pieces of information we want. Things like who sent it, when was it sent, you know, let's look at some attachments, that kind of idea. This is what we often refer to as metadata. Just like on a message in your outbox or your inbox, or in this case, the folder, there's metadata, and we want to kind of map that to data in Whisper. Now, this is one thing that is really handy. Just like if I found accounts payable, I assumed that was an accounts payable object or item, and I related it to that. We have the capability of saying, hey, if I've got a metadata field on a Whisper email, and it matches a metadata field that's on the email itself, we assume we want that data put in there. So we don't have to write any special rules. We don't have to do any regular expressions. We don't have any custom setup or anything. That's just kind of how it works. So let's hop back into Whisper here and I'll show a couple of things. So I'm going to go down to my profile here. So this is the profile As I'd mentioned, we're looking at a particular folder on the drive. This will populate with all my folders here in a second. Just takes a second the first time you load it up to connect. But I've specified an email address. I've specified the folder I'm going to be looking at. And this is the view in Whisper that we see here. So these are the emails that are in there. I mentioned this last week. The way that the authentication works is that the first time I opened this up, I was prompted for my password to log into my email. Just like the first time I log into a SharePoint site, if I'm not already authenticated to it, it'll pop up that login. Just to enforce, the Whisper is a very, it's a passive tool. And in doing so, Whisper is not, the server at Whisper is not connecting to that email box. I'm connecting to that email box and telling Whisper the appropriate information. So here's the email. So let's just start. I'm going to start something simple here, just to kind of build on what we did last week here. I have the same rule that we ran last week to relate it to departments. Here, I found the subject of this email said accounts payable, so I put it right into accounts payable. Definitely go back and watch how we did that last week. So we're going to go down to something a little bit more specific on an email. I'm going to start kind of at the bottom and work our way up in more complex kind of situations. So let's start kind of an easy one here. On my Whisper item in my Whisper email item, I have things like displayed to or date, time received. These are metadata fields that are on the email. They're different depending on the Exchange server and things like that. But some of the basic ones to display to, I want to see that display information on who it was sent to. So if I go back to my email and I go down to that same email here, you can see that it's the display, the two here, it's actually called display to, has Daryl and staff. So I don't see all the emails here. I just see the displayed information from that. You can go more and more specific here, date, time received. So that was when the email was received. This comes in handy. We'll look at how we can classify stuff based on this date, time received to do some generic retentions when it comes to our email. Internet message ID, maybe this is something your IT guys need for when we're doing cleanups at the end and things like that. I've got a couple other metadata fields on here that didn't get populated. So project number and PII. This is the more complex situations we'll come back to. And we can see here, okay, I've got that information. I'm missing one key one here. So I just wanted to go through the process of showing, just like we've done in the past where, hey, I found something new. How do I continue to build on Whisper to incorporate more and more types of objects and the data associated with them? So I'm going to add from here. So I'm missing the from data, and I just want to add this to my form. So I'm going to go into my object editor. I'm going to try not to hop too much into the editors, but I wanted to show that process and how we're continually adding to what we're working on here. And I'll switch to emails. So I've got my email metadata in my form over here. So I'm just going to add that from, and from is going to match the metadata on the email. And it's going to be a string here. I'm just going to move it up. So now I've got that metadata field from, just going to quickly add it to my form. So I'm going to make a new line at the bottom here, add a new one, and add from. We're going to make it, I like doing my 627. I like the width of that. So now here we can see, oh, actually I've got it up a little bit further already. Oh, I already have from, okay. And remember the configuration for when I was doing testing. So I'm just going to remove that line so we don't have it twice. So we've got from here now on my email. So if I go back, what happened here, okay, we've now added the metadata field, but last time I synced, we didn't have that metadata field on our email. So we're going to see that all of our email are missing from, but I'm not going to create any new rules here or anything. I'm just going to run the sync again. All I did was add the metadata field. I'm going to run that sync again, and we're going to start picking up from email addresses without having to use the data engine rule. It's running through the data engine rule. It's just a default in how it works, but we'll kind of see what comes at the other end here. So here, I'll select that email again quickly before it starts running here. We can see my from is empty. In a sec here, it'll start running. There's some caching. First time you do anything, it's got to connect to the first time. So when this is done here, so we got the 11 emails were synced. So if I refresh this here, we can start seeing we actually got the from and the email address and stuff. This is kind of more important here. We're seeing some actual email addresses and not just using the display name from the Exchange server. Nothing No extra configuration other than just adding that metadata field, matching the name of the attribute, running our sync again, and it picked it up. Okay, so well, let's keep kind of building on complexity here. Let's go down to the bottom here. I'd mentioned our classification. I've already run this and I've already said where I did set up a rule to say anything that I sync in from this profile, automatically classify it as a email default classification. And in my default classification for emails, I've specified a 1-year retention, and it's based off of the date time received. So I've already configured that. That's a little bit of extra stuff that happened behind the scenes, but I just wanted to show all these emails in here now have a 1-year retention applied to them. And I can start reporting on that. So maybe, so all these emails here were created, in the past couple of weeks when I was setting this up. So we're not going to expect anything to be ready now, but if I go over to my classification tab here, and I want to look at my email default classification, just adding some filtering here, I can see as of today, nothing's coming up. These emails are just created recently. So I'm going to say, 2022, I've come back to here and I can see all of the emails that are in that, that mailbox folder have the default email classification, and I can see that they're ready to go if I would have run this in 2022. We can generate our reports from this information to maybe we got to get sign off before we start cleaning this stuff up and things like that. But just wanted to show how not only the metadata is kind of being added here, we can also add a classification to help us with other processes. Okay, let's hop back to our electronic tab here. So I had mentioned we found an accounts payable email. We found some email metadata. We've classified some email. I want to build on this and start getting into more not so generic metadata fields that you'd expect to get off the email. On my email, I actually set up a project number. Now, for the purposes of this, we're going to look at project numbers as being, as an organization, we name them a 5-digit number. So we're basically telling Whisper, if you find a 5-digit number, assume it's a project number and put it into the metadata field. So this is where the data engine rule can be highly configured. You can get really down into the weeds. At this time, I will open this up to kind of go in here to show what's happening. So this is a list of the rule mappings. The rules themselves are applied to either all profiles or individual profiles. So I can say when I scan this mailbox, I want to run these rules. When I want to scan that mailbox or that folder, I want to run these rules. So my rule here for get project number, I basically said whenever I run Whisper Part 4 profile, get my project numbers and apply it to this. Actually should be to project number. And the way this works for anybody that's maybe a little bit more technical, essentially this is just a regular expression where I said get project number, match it on a 5-digit regular expression. Gives maybe a more technical user a lot more power on being able to get some more information in this. So I'm gonna go back here. I'm gonna go up to this email halfway up here, and I can see that there was a 5-digit number in the subject of this. And what we can see here is that the project number has now been put into the project metadata field. So not only did we get the metadata off the email and gave it a default classification, we've done some extra stuff here to be able to find a project number. So just want to explain maybe how we would use this. So I've got a project number here. I'm going to hop back to my all objects, and I'm going to actually just use my free text filter, and I'm going to put in that project number. And here I can see I've got a number of different things that came up with that 5-digit code. And here you can see on my shared drive here, when I did the sync from the shared drive, I had a procurement 12345. So that was probably the procurement for this project. And then I have emails that I found in my inbox that also had that project number on it here. We actually capture the project number. The reason we're seeing the departments is actually the department ID. I made on them 12345. But I just wanted to show here, tying back to what we saw from bringing in other content, we not only got the emails associated with this project, we can also search and find all the other documents that might have been associated with. Maybe we had a box that had a description saying project files for 12345. We would see it in the box here as well. Okay, let's hop back and go kind of one step further here. We started talking about the metadata and how we can search for it. We talked about a process where we can classify things and find when emails come up for a retention period that we applied to it, get a project number. Let's build to a one more kind of process here and add something a little bit further in a PII flag. So personal information. Often we're going to have personal information across the organization and all of our different ones. Today, we're going to look at how can we identify some email that might contain personal information. So I've actually got two emails here that I created a rule for that found a Western IM ID. So at Western IM, our employee IDs are WIM and then a 6-digit code. Just like I did for projects, I said, go out and find a 5-digit code and assume that that's a project number. Here, I've said, okay, find what we consider a project or a employee ID. Don't map that employee ID to a metadata field. I just want you to map. So before it's a match. If you find this, that's the value. And in this case, the rule is if you find it, set this flag to true. So this one is a PII flag. So the two emails here, disciplinary action. This one was a disciplinary action against me. Troy was bad. I think the body of the email was. And then here's a pink slip for Rick. So by setting this PII flag, we can use that even further in the Whisper system. The kind of scenario that I worked through for this was, if I've done all these things and I've got this information in Whisper, how can we start saying, you know what, there's certain piece of information like stuff that contains personal information that I don't want everybody seeing. So what I have actually set up here is an actual email review tab. And in this email review tab that I set up, the parameters for it were show me all the emails from that Western IM or Whisper Part 4 folder that don't contain a PII flag. So this would be something where, hey, yeah, sure, we found all these emails, but let's not show everybody the things that have personal information. And this is where our new stuff in version 4 comes in, where we can give permissions to this tab. So maybe we have summer students coming in doing indexing on emails from Brian's email box because he's left the company and we need a little bit more out of it, but we don't want that person seeing the stuff that we've identified as personal information in those emails. Let's give them a tab that has all of the emails that don't contain personal information. Okay, so the kind of end result here, keep building from what we had before, is now our kind of hierarchical structure is starting to get emails, physical information. Here, I'll go to the view here where we have kind of everything here. So here under accounts payable, we found that email. We had some folders on shared drives that had files. We had boxes that had volumes. We're starting to kind of build out our entire view of the organization. I believe some of these electronic files might have actually come from a SharePoint site as well. The emails alongside here, the default that we had set is unknown. So we have quite a few emails in here. Just wanted to show, tying again back to our structure here, is I can see a lot of this email didn't get put away into a department. It all fell out under unknown. I was watching last week's webinar again, and I did notice that I kind of didn't emphasize some of the ideas of this right-hand side view, left-hand side view, left and right, is that I can take some of these emails. So they, like this particular email here, for example, let me find that project one here. So this project one is under my unknown department, but we know that our project files should actually be under a different, maybe it's, let me find here, one that might be more Rick's department. Maybe we want to start putting these emails into Rick's department. Just to go back to the relationship stuff, we can actually drag and drop here. I don't think we kind of emphasize the idea that some of this stuff, yeah, we've got these great rules and we set some default values and we found some metadata, but at the end of the day, sometimes we just got to kind of do that manual process. So Rick's department's got a few more emails here. The other thing I wanted to emphasize as well, going back to our project, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our project files, I'll open up this email one, got the default classification. How can we say, hey, these two project files should actually be a different classification, we can go in here and say, do a bulk update as well. So at the end of the day, we're not stuck adhering to the rules. There's always exceptions to the rules. And in this case, I just wanted to clarify that we do have some ability to say, okay, these two project files are not email default classification. We want to change that to COM04. And in doing so, we can change the classification on things here to say, okay, these two files came up for COM04. And now that email is not just kept for that default 1-year retention that we had. We have now a COM04, but I believe this is a 7-year retention. Okay, so in kind of conclusion, now that we've got to this point, I wanted to look ahead a little bit to next week. Next week, now that we've gotten this far, we've got metadata, we've got an organizational structure, we've got a view of it. What can we do with this? All this information came from a lot of different sources. Now that we have it all together, what can we do with it in terms of maybe we want to make this available to a SharePoint user. Next week, we'll be focusing on SharePoint, how we'll actually export all of this structure with the departments and folders and files and that into a SharePoint site, and how we can then manage going forward. Just like you saw here, we had things like reporting. We generated a report to see what was ready to go. Even though it's been moved out to the SharePoint, we still have a classification on it. So we can still say, hey, that email, wherever it is, Whisper knows about it, and we can do some work in the SharePoint space, for example. Even though next week we're going to be focusing on SharePoint, I will show a shared drive export and a Documentum export too, I believe, just to show some of the power of what we can do with other EDRMS systems and use the functionality within those to accomplish what might come out the other end. So that's what I had here for today. So I think we could probably get Rick back in here.
Well, you won't see my talking head, Troy, because it won't let me.
Yeah, I think this
That's all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nobody needs to see my talking head anyway. Many of the people on the webinar know what I look like, so that's okay. Troy, I just wanted to ask, I mean, Whisper is really not an e-discovery tool. It wasn't ever designed to be an e-discovery tool, but what I saw you do today are some of the things that might be used in that kind of environment to find certain things in an organization. How about things like legal hold? Like we can also do the same thing and flag a legal hold, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I showed when I added the from field, we actually went into the type editor and added another one. As we're doing this process, just what I did for that, we found something else. We identified another piece of information, metadata, object, whatever it might be. We didn't know right from the beginning that we needed legal hold. We can come in, add legal hold at time of doing syncs and bringing information in and set that based off. Maybe we make another rule. Maybe we say, if it came from Troy, put it on everything from Troy at troy.sawyer@westernim.com. If you find that email, put the legal hold on it. So it's very powerful in the sense that the rules can be very open and generic or very, very specific when it comes to something like a flag.
So I've also noted, Troy, just recently that a lot of the large corporations, particularly in the US, have started to try and clean up their email out of their Exchange servers because they've got, hundreds of millions of emails out there now. And a lot of them have taken the stance of, okay, if it's over X number of years old, and the number I hear often is 7 years, they say if it's over 7 years, I want to get rid of it, and we'll classify the rest of it as best we can. And except for, there's always the except for pockets of things that they don't want to do that with that are more permanent retention or need to be retained longer because legal says they need to be retained longer, or HR or somebody like that. And so we can set all those rules, right? In using this kind of environment to make sure that happens.
Yeah, very much so. So the default that I made for my Whisper Part 4 folder on my email was that default email classification that I set to 1 year. So everything got that by default. But what we can do, just like I mentioned, if we find the word project, maybe it's not finding a project number, it's literally just finding the word project. give that the project classification. If you find a contract, for example, give that a contract classification. And so we kind of do that rule priority where it's like, okay, everything will get a default value, but then if you find contract, make it this classification. Then if you find project, make it this classification. So there's a number of ways you can use the data engine rule to accomplish that. Yep.
That's great, Troy. That would sure save a lot of aggravation and time for people that are cleaning up those hundreds of millions of emails out in the field.
Yeah.
And the fact is, we can also set flags for things like audit hold. I mean, it's not just always a legal hold; it could be an audit hold, right? Things like that. It depends on the application, what people are trying to do with it. And I just wanted to say, Troy, the one thing that records management people have always asked me about in terms of email was the issue they always had was people were retiring or leaving the organization. And when they left, there was like 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 emails in their inbox, and they needed some way to deal with it, like a process. So we could kind of define our process internally in our organization for what happens when somebody leaves or retires or whatever. And then records management could actually apply those things to the email and give IT the rules to deal with it after the fact.
Yeah. So one of the implementations I put together recently, maybe I should have had in this, but the idea was that, as an organization, we've corresponded with Western IM. You have, I have, Brian has, we've got emails that went to westernim.com. That person leaves the organization. We still want that full kind of transactional history that happened between us and another organization, for example. So what happened there is that basically the rule said I had company here, and the company had a domain. So the domain was, westernim.com. And the rule was basically any email that was at westernim.com associated with that company. So we had a number of different companies for the ones that they dealt with. And under each one of those, the organization would get the email associated with them. And then at the end, when we exported out to their EDRMS system, you left, I left, Brian left, and then later on somebody comes in and they now have a complete history from all of our inboxes that have every email that was ever kind of sent back and forth between me and Western IM, us as an organization, and westernim.com.
Yeah, I mean, that's all about supporting documentation for important events in a corporation. I mean, that's a corporate kind of process, right? That the corporation would define, and then you have Whisper kind of put the rules in play to that information as part of a process.
Yeah, even in this particular case, the thing that comes up often is corporate knowledge. You don't want to lose all that, right?
Right.
There are times that come up where I'll deal with a client that I haven't dealt with since, Bob used to work here. If I had Bob's email and how he solved that problem, like, he's gone. But if I can go through and say, we've archived all of Bob's email under Western IM in our repository, I can go and see that entire history. Whereas if it was still stuck in his Exchange server, I would not have had access to it.
So there's a fine line though between keeping everything and homing in on what we actually want to keep, and that's really a corporate decision at some point between corporate legal and the organization itself. And so that's good. At least we have a mechanism to deal with that, because IT certainly doesn't. I mean, they don't have the rules. They can blanket say we're going to get rid of everything over 7 years, but that doesn't make sense in a lot of situations. You need a little more finesse than that in terms of how you get rid of things and why in an organization. So it's really good, Troy. Thanks very much for sharing that with us, and I'll be looking really forward next week to seeing us go to another level again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, just to kind of wrap up just in the last part there, what you're mentioning is we don't want to keep everything. That was the key with the using the domain of where it came from. So anything that was sent or come from westernim.com, we considered to be something we wanted to keep, but everything in Bob's mailbox that was to hotmail.com fell out to that other area that was not moved. So that's kind of how we accomplished that. Yep.
That's good. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, so that's what kind of we'll see next week is we'll bring all this together. We're going to mostly work in some SharePoint spaces because it's pretty common for everybody. We'll get some of this stuff put out to a SharePoint site. We'll look at how we've captured all this metadata like we did today. How do we map that out? And just like we saw today where, hey, Whisper's got a metadata field called from and SharePoint's got a metadata field called from. We're going to keep passing that all the way through. The email had from, Whisper now has from, and there's a column in SharePoint called from, and all of that stuff will get kind of passed along as we do the process next week.
Oh, great, Troy. That's great. Well, thanks everybody for coming on today. We hope you're enjoying this webinar series. There'll be more after this, of course, but thanks very much for coming on our webinar series. And I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. Thanks, Troy, for your presentation today.
Yeah, thanks very much. And as a kind of wrap up here, I will be sending out the recording to everybody, just like I've done in the past, to get an email with a link to this site, our site here. If you want to go back and look at the past ones, if you come to our site under westernim.com, the blog section's got the past 3 webinar series and the recordings in each of these. And this is also where you can come to get generic help for Whisper, or take a look at the product page if you like to kind of maybe request your own demo here on the westernim.com software page for Whisper. Thanks, everybody, and have a good rest of your day. See you next week.
Thanks, everybody.